Kang Minho rubbed his tired eyes and stared at the screen again. The numbers made no sense. For 3 days straight, his monitoring equipment had been going crazy, showing readings that should have been impossible. Deep space was supposed to be empty out here at the edge of the void sector. Nothing could survive the quantum storms that rage through this region of space. But something was definitely out there. The gravitational sensors were picking up a massive object moving through space. Not just big. Absolutely enormous. Bigger than anything Minho had ever seen in his 15 years working at the Deep Space Monitoring Station. At first, he thought his equipment was broken. Maybe the old sensors finally gave up after decades of faithful service. Then the backup systems started showing the same readings. Then the emergency arrays kicked in with identical data. 3 separate systems couldn't all be wrong at the same time. Minho called his supervisor, but she just laughed it off. "Probably space debris," she said. "File a routine report and forget about it." But Minho couldn't forget about it. The object was moving too fast and too purposefully to be debris. It had a destination. As the hours passed, more details became clear. Whatever was out there had been traveling for a very long time. The energy signatures suggested advanced technology, but nothing that matched any known civilization in the galaxy. The ship, because it definitely was a ship, showed signs of extensive battle damage. Scorch marks ran along its hull like scars from countless fights. When the vessel finally emerged from hyperspace near the busy Nexus trade hub, everyone could see it clearly. The ship was absolutely massive, dwarfing even the largest military vessels. Its dark metal hull looked ancient but somehow still powerful. Strange symbols covered its surface, and weapon ports dotted its sides like the eyes of some sleeping giant. The Nexus control tower immediately sent out standard greeting signals. "Unknown vessel, please identify yourself and state your business." For long minutes there was only silence. Then a crackling voice came through the communication channels, speaking in a language that no computer could translate, but buried in the strange words were numbers, mathematical constants that any spacefaring species would recognize. Using these universal concepts, the ship slowly spelled out its identity. TSS Defender, Terran Space Service. The control room fell silent. Everyone knew that name from history classes. Terrans, humans, the species that had vanished from the galaxy 3,000 years ago during the Great Exodus. Most people thought they were just legends now, stories told to children about the mysterious people who once lived among the stars before disappearing into the dark. But here they were, returning in a ship that looked like it had been through hell and back. The question that terrified everyone was simple. If humans had been gone for 3,000 years, what had they been doing all this time? And more importantly, what had brought them back? The docking bay of Nexus Station had never seen anything like this before. Captain Park Ji-won stepped off the shuttle wearing a uniform that looked both familiar and completely alien at the same time. The fabric seemed to shimmer with built-in technology, and the insignia on her shoulders glowed with soft blue light. She moved with the confident stride of someone who had seen real combat, not the ceremonial posturing that most galactic diplomats were used to. The assembled council members had prepared for this meeting very differently than what they were seeing. They expected to greet refugees, tired, desperate survivors who would be grateful for any help the galaxy could offer. Instead, they found themselves face to face with a woman who looked like she could conquer half the galaxy before lunch. Ambassador Veltar, the senior council representative, stepped forward with the standard welcoming speech he had memorized. But Ji-won held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "We don't have time for pleasantries," she said, in perfect galactic standard, though with an accent that sounded both ancient and strangely modern. "We need to talk, and we need to talk now." The council members exchanged worried glances. This wasn't how first contact meetings were supposed to go. There were protocols, ceremonies, formal introductions that could take days. But something in Ji-won's eyes told them that normal rules didn't apply here. They moved to the main conference room, where representatives from 47 different species had gathered to witness this historic moment. Ji-won looked around the room, taking in faces that ranged from curious to suspicious to downright hostile. Some species remembered the old stories about humans and weren't happy to see them return. I know what you're thinking, Jiwon began, her voice carrying easily across the large room. You think we're the same primitive species that ran away 3,000 years ago. You think we've been hiding in some corner of space, barely surviving, while you built this great galactic civilization. She paused, letting her words sink in. You're wrong about everything. The captain activated a small device on her wrist, and a holographic display filled the center of the room. Images flashed by, showing massive shipyards, advanced weapons, hand technology that made the Council's best equipment look like children's toys. We didn't run away because we were afraid, Jiwon continued. We left because something was hunting all of us. Something that had already destroyed 17 galaxies before it came here. Our ancestors helped drive it back, but we knew it would return someday. So we followed it into the dark space between galaxies. The room erupted in whispers and concerned murmurs. Ancient legends spoke of great destroyers that had once threatened the galaxy, but most people thought they were just stories. Jiwon's expression grew grim. We've spent 3,000 years fighting these things. We've become very good at it. But now they're coming back home and they're bringing friends. The war that's coming will make every conflict in galactic history look like a playground fight. She looked directly at each council member. We're here to help you survive what's coming, but we're going to do it our way. Dr. Lee Nari had been studying the galactic core for most of her adult life, but she had never seen anything like this. Deep in her laboratory aboard the research station, surrounded by screens showing data from thousands of sensors scattered throughout the galaxy, she watched as ancient systems that had been dormant for millennia suddenly came to life. The first alert came from a monitoring probe near the core worlds. Energy signatures that matched nothing in any database were pulsing through space like a heartbeat. Then another probe detected the same signals, then another. Within hours, sensor arrays across the inner galaxy were all reporting the same impossible readings. Nari pulled up the historical archives, searching through records that most people had forgotten existed. The files were classified at the highest levels, accessible only to a handful of researchers who studied galactic history. What she found made her blood run cold. 3,000 years ago, something had tried to destroy the galaxy. The old records called them devourers, artificial intelligences that didn't just conquer worlds, they consumed them completely. These machines would strip a planet down to its core, absorbing every bit of matter and energy before moving on to the next target. They had already wiped out 17 entire galaxies before reaching this one. The ancient civilizations had fought desperately against the devourers, but conventional weapons were useless. The machines adapted to every attack, grew stronger from every defeat. Just when it seemed like all hope was lost, a young species called humans had joined the fight. Together with the other races, they had managed to drive the devourers back into the empty space between galaxies. But the records also contained a terrifying warning. The devourers weren't destroyed, just exiled, and they were programmed to return if they ever detected the technology signatures of the species that had defeated them. Nari compared the current energy readings with the old data files. The match was perfect. The devourers were waking up, and they had detected something that told them their ancient enemies had returned to the galaxy. She ran the calculations 3 times, hoping she was wrong, but the math was clear. The appearance of human technology in the galaxy had triggered automated awakening protocols in dormant devourer ships. Systems that had been sleeping for 3 millennia were powering up, beginning their preparation for another war. The scope of the threat was beyond anything the current galactic civilization could imagine. The devourers didn't just want to conquer territory or resources. They wanted to consume everything, every planet, every star, every trace of organic life. They were perfect killing machines, designed for only one purpose: total extinction of biological life. Nari's hands shook as she transmitted her findings to the Galactic Council. She included detailed projections of what would happen when the devourers fully awakened. The first wave would target the outer rim worlds, testing current galactic defenses. Once they determined how much the galaxy's military capabilities had advanced, they would launch a full-scale assault designed to finish what they had started 3,000 years ago. The terrifying truth was becoming clear. Humanity hadn't returned. to the galaxy as refugees or even as allies. They had come back as the only species that knew how to fight an enemy that could end all life in the galaxy. The question was whether 3,000 years of warfare had made them strong enough to win this time. Commander Kim Tae-hyung stood at the center of the Galactic Council chamber, watching as centuries of careful diplomacy crumbled around him. The massive circular room buzzed with angry voices, speaking in dozens of different languages. Representatives from 47 species argued, shouted, and threatened each other while the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. The humans cannot be trusted. Ambassador Zektar slammed his four-armed fist on his speaking podium. They abandoned us once before, and now they return only when it serves their purpose. How do we know they're not working with these devourers? A chorus of agreement rose from several species. The hegemony worlds, who had built their power during humanity's absence, saw the returning humans as a direct threat to their authority. They had spent 3,000 years convincing everyone that they were the galaxy's natural protectors. But other voices spoke up in humanity's defense. The humans have no reason to lie about this threat, called out Representative Morden from the Rim worlds. If they wanted to conquer us, they could have just attacked instead of warning us. Tae-hyung had been through situations like this before, though never with stakes quite this high. During his years fighting in the void between galaxies, he had learned that politics and survival rarely mixed well. But here he was, trying to convince an entire galaxy to trust him while their politicians played games. "You're all missing the point," Tae-hyung said, his voice cutting through the arguments. "While you sit here debating whether humans can be trusted, the Devourers are already moving. Every minute you waste arguing is another minute they get closer to your worlds." The Veltaran ambassador stood up, his tall frame imposing even among the diverse gathering. "And what proof do we have of this threat beyond human claims? Your people could be making up this entire story to justify an invasion." Before Tae-hyung could respond, an aide rushed into the chamber carrying an urgent message pad. The room fell, silent as the aide whispered something to the council moderator. The color drained from the moderator's face as he read the report. "I've just received word from our outer rim monitoring stations," the moderator announced, his voice barely above a whisper. "3 colonies in the Kepler sector have gone completely silent. Their automated distress beacons stopped transmitting 6 hours ago." The chamber erupted in panic. The Kepler colonies were home to over 50 million people across 12 different species. They couldn't just disappear without a trace. "It's starting," Tae-hyung said grimly. "The Devourers always begin with isolated targets to test their capabilities. They're learning about your current technology, your defense systems, your response times. Once they have enough data, they'll move to bigger targets." More reports began flooding in. Communication arrays throughout the outer rim were detecting strange energy signatures. Several deep space patrol ships had vanished without sending distress calls. Whatever was happening out there was moving fast and leaving no survivors to report back. The political argument suddenly seemed petty compared to the reality of entire worlds going dark. Species that had been shouting at each other minutes before now looked to Tae-hyung with desperate hope. "What do you need from us?" asked the moderator, finally understanding that humanity might be their only chance of survival. Tae-hyung's expression was grim but determined. "Everything you've got, and pray it's enough." Admiral Choi Min-jae walked into the Emergency War Council meeting like a man who had seen the end of the world and lived to tell about it. The assembled military leaders from across the galaxy had been arguing for hours about fleet formations and battle strategies, but they all fell silent when the human admiral entered the room. Min-jae didn't waste time with pleasantries. He activated a holographic display that showed the current galactic situation in brutal detail. Red zones marked where colonies had gone silent. Yellow areas indicated systems under threat. The pattern was clear. The Devourers were systematically working their way toward the populated core worlds. "Your current military doctrine won't work," Min-jae said bluntly, causing several alien commanders to bristle with offense. "You're thinking about this like a normal war between civilizations. This isn't normal. The Devourers don't want your territory or your resources. They want everything dead." General Kexvol of the Hegemony Fleet leaned forward aggressively. "Human arrogance hasn't changed, I see. We've been defending this galaxy for 3,000 years while you ran away. Minje's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. You've been playing at war for 3,000 years. We've been living it. The Admiral gestured to the display, showing manufacturing statistics that made the assembled leaders gasp. Human industrial capacity exceeded the combined output of the top 10 galactic civilizations. Their ships were being produced at a rate that should have been impossible. We can build a fleet large enough to match the Devourers, Minje continued, but it comes with conditions. You follow our battle plans exactly. No exceptions, no modifications, no committee decisions. When we say retreat, you retreat. When we say sacrifice a system to save 10 others, you do it. The room erupted in protests. Commander Velkra of the Centauri Defense Force stood up angrily. You're talking about abandoning billions of innocent people. I'm talking about saving trillions, Minje shot back. The Devourers don't take prisoners. Every second you spend trying to save everyone is a second that gets more people killed. Admiral Torvek asked the question everyone was thinking. What happened to you out there? What did you become? Minje was quiet for a long moment, staring at the tactical display. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of centuries of warfare. We became what we had to become. The humans who left this galaxy 3,000 years ago believed in honor, mercy, protecting the innocent. Those humans would have lost this war in the first year. He pulled up combat footage from the Void Wars, massive battles fought in the empty darkness between galaxies. The tactics were ruthless, efficient, and absolutely terrifying. Human ships used strategies that treated their own crews as expendable resources. We learned that monsters can only be defeated by bigger monsters. Minje continued, we stripped away everything that made us weak. Compassion, hesitation, the luxury of moral choices. We became a weapon designed for one purpose, killing Devourers. The alien commanders looked horrified, but they also looked desperate. More reports were coming in every hour. Entire star systems were vanishing without a trace. The choice is yours, Minje said finally. You can keep your principles and watch the galaxy die, or you can trust us to do what needs to be done. But decide quickly. The Devourers won't wait for you to make up your minds. Lieutenant Song Hyeri walked through the manufacturing decks of the human flagship, watching machines that never stopped working. The noise was overwhelming, metal being shaped, weapons being assembled, and the constant hum of production that had been going on for 3,000 years. This wasn't just a warship. It was an entire industrial civilization packed into one massive vessel. The galactic observers following her looked amazed and terrified at the same time. Ambassador Colven from the Trade Federation kept shaking his head in disbelief. This is impossible, he muttered. No ship can produce this much equipment this quickly. Hyeri glanced at him with tired eyes. When your entire species exists, to fight one enemy, you learn to be efficient. The production statistics were staggering. In just 1 week, the human ships had manufactured more weapons than most civilizations could build in a year. Plasma cannons rolled off assembly lines. Like toys, armor plating was produced in sheets that could protect entire cities. Most impressive of all were the ship hulls, massive frames that would become new warships, built from blueprints that had been perfected through centuries of constant warfare. But the visitors soon realized that something was deeply wrong with what they were seeing. The human workers moved like machines themselves, showing no emotion, no fatigue, no conversation with each other. They performed their tasks with mechanical precision, as if they had been programmed rather than trained. "Where are your families?" asked Dr. Zektol, a sociologist who had come to study human society. "Where are your children, your elderly, your artists and musicians?" Hyeri stopped walking and turned to face the group. "There are no families, no children, no artists." Her voice was flat, matter-of-fact. "Those are luxuries that we couldn't afford." The horrified silence that followed made Hyeri continue explaining. "Every human is born for war. We're genetically modified for enhanced reflexes, improved healing, and resistance to radiation. We're educated only in subjects that help us fight. We don't have hobbies, romance, or personal dreams. We exist to kill Devourers." Ambassador Morvin stepped backward, his face pale. You've turned yourselves into machines. We've turned ourselves into weapons, Yeri corrected. It was the only way to survive what we were fighting. She led them to another section, where the real horror became clear. The weapons being produced weren't just advanced, they were designed to cause maximum suffering. Viruses that would turn enemy ships' life support systems into torture chambers. Energy weapons that would slowly disintegrate targets over hours instead of killing them quickly. Psychological warfare devices that would drive entire populations insane. "These weapons are monstrous," whispered General Kexvol. "They're designed to cause unnecessary pain." "They're designed to work against an enemy that feels no pain," Yeri replied. "The Devourers study everything they fight. They adapt to every weapon, every strategy. The only way to stay ahead of them is to always find new ways to destroy them completely." The lieutenant showed them plans for weapons that would make stars go supernova, turning entire solar systems into weapons against the Devourers. Other blueprints detailed how to weaponize black holes, time itself, and even the basic forces that held matter together. "Our ancestors would call us monsters," Yeri admitted quietly. "They probably wouldn't recognize us as human anymore, but they'd be dead if we hadn't changed, and so would you." The visiting dignitaries left the manufacturing decks in stunned silence, finally understanding what humanity had sacrificed to become strong enough to fight the Devourers. The question now was whether the galaxy could accept that kind of salvation. General Lim Dongyuk stood in the command center of the massive defense station, watching the battle unfold across dozens of star systems simultaneously. The Kepler defense. Line stretched across 40 light-years, the last barrier between the Devourer fleet and the populated core worlds. Everything that happened here would determine whether civilization survived or became just another consumed galaxy. The first wave of Devourer ships had arrived 3 hours ago, and they were unlike anything the galactic forces had ever seen. These weren't ships in any traditional sense. They were living metal constructs that grew larger as they consumed matter. Each one could strip a planet bare in hours, using the materials to build more of themselves. "Sir, the Vortex colony is requesting immediate evacuation support," reported his aide, Captain Lee Subin. 40 million civilians are trapped on the surface." Dongyuk didn't even look up from his tactical display. "Negative. All evacuation ships are needed for the Nexus system defense. Vortex is expendable." The galactic observers in the command center gasped in horror. Ambassador Velkan grabbed Dongyuk's arm desperately. "You can't just abandon 40 million people." "I can and I will," Dongyuk replied coldly, shaking off the ambassador's grip. "Those 40 million are already dead. The Devourers reached Vortex 30 minutes ago. If I send ships to help them, I'll lose those ships and the 100 million people they could save somewhere else." The main display showed the brutal mathematics of the battle. Devourer forces were advancing on 7 different fronts, probing for weaknesses in the defense line. The human strategy was simple but horrifying. Sacrifice systems that couldn't be held to concentrate forces where they could make a difference. "Beta Squadron, pull back from the Meridian system immediately," Dongyuk ordered. "Let the Devourers have it. Regroup at the Titan defense grid." Commander Torvek of the Hegemony fleet couldn't stay silent anymore. "General, there are 12 billion people in the Meridian system. We can't just abandon them." Dongyuk finally turned to face the assembled galactic commanders, his expression harder than stone. "Watch me. Those 12 billion are going to die, whether we help them or not. The question is whether we waste resources trying to save corpses, or use those resources to save people who can actually be saved." The battle continued with mechanical precision. Human forces moved like pieces on a chessboard, always thinking several moves ahead. When the Devourers concentrated their forces to break through one section of the line, human ships would immediately abandon adjacent systems, falling back to predetermined positions. The galactic forces watched in growing horror as the human commanders made decision after decision that would have been unthinkable to them. Entire worlds were written off as acceptable losses. Refugee ships were denied protection so that military vessels could maintain strategic positions. Civilian populations were used as bait to lure Devourer forces into traps. But the strategy was working. Despite their overwhelming technological superiority, the Devourers couldn't break through the defense line. Every time they consumed a system and grew stronger, they found that the humans had already anticipated their moves and prepared countermeasures. "How can you live with yourselves?" whispered Dr. Zeknari, watching another colony vanish from the tactical display. Donghyuk's voice was tired but unwavering. "We live with it because the alternative is everyone dies. You still think this is a normal war where you can save everybody and have a happy ending. This is survival. Either we become monsters or we become extinct." The defense line held, but the cost was written in the ashes of a dozen worlds. Colonel Yu Jihi received the evacuation orders with the same emotionless expression she wore for everything else. The Devourer breakthrough at Sector 7 meant that 17 star systems were now behind enemy lines, cut off from any hope of rescue. Her job was to make sure those systems couldn't be used against the remaining galactic forces. "Implement Protocol Omega across all compromised sectors," she announced to her command staff. The order was transmitted instantly to human operatives, scattered throughout the affected systems. Within minutes, carefully placed charges would destroy everything the Devourers could use: factories, shipyards, fuel depots, and communication networks. But Protocol Omega went far beyond destroying. Military assets. Ambassador Coldane, who had been observing human operations, looked confused as he read the protocol details. "Colonel, this order includes destroying hospitals, schools, and residential areas. Those are civilian targets with no military value." Jihye turned to face him with cold, calculating eyes. "The Devourers use organic matter as raw material. Every civilian they capture becomes part of their manufacturing process. Dead civilians can't be turned into weapons." The horrifying reality of what she was suggesting sank in slowly. The human forces weren't just planning to deny resources to the enemy. They were planning to kill their own allies, rather than let them be captured. "This is mass murder," whispered Dr. Morvek from the Galactic Medical Council. "You're talking about killing billions of innocent people. I'm talking about preventing those billions from being turned into tools that will kill trillions," Jihi replied matter-of-factly. "The Devourers don't just kill their prisoners, they convert them into living components for their machines. Would you rather those people die quickly, or spend eternity as conscious parts of a weapon designed to destroy their own families?" The galactic observers had seen recordings of what happened when Devourers captured populated worlds. The process was indeed worse than death. Organic beings were kept alive but stripped of free will, turned into biological computers that retained their memories and emotions while being forced to help destroy everything they once loved. "There has to be another way," pleaded General Zektor. "We can't just execute entire populations because it's strategically convenient." Jihye pulled up a tactical projection showing the current battle situation. "The Devourers have broken through our lines in 4 places. They're heading for the core worlds where 60% of the galaxy's population lives. Every hour we delay gives them more time to reach those worlds. Every resource we don't deny them makes them stronger." The math was brutal but undeniable. The compromised systems contained roughly 20 billion people. The core worlds held over 300 billion. If Protocol Omega could slow the Devourer advance even slightly, it would save 15 times more lives than it cost. Emergency council sessions were being held across the galaxy as political leaders grappled with the impossible choice. Some species flatly refused to cooperate with Protocol Omega, calling it genocide. Others, seeing the tactical projections, reluctantly agreed that it was the lesser evil. "The decision isn't mine to make," Jihi said finally, "but it needs to be made in the next 6 hours. After that, the Devourers will be too close to the core worlds for Protocol Omega to make a difference." She left the command room, leaving the galactic representatives to face the hardest choice in their civilization's history. Outside, human ships waited for orders that would either save the galaxy or damn the souls of everyone who gave them. The war had forced them all to choose between their humanity and their survival. Fleet Admiral Han Seok-jin walked into the rebuilt council chambers with the measured pace of someone who no longer needed to ask for permission. The war against the Devourers was over, won at a cost that would haunt the galaxy for generations. Empty seats around the circular chamber served as silent reminders of the species that hadn't survived to see this moment. The remaining representatives watched him with a mixture of gratitude, fear, and barely concealed resentment. These were the leaders of civilizations that had once considered humanity primitive refugees. Now they sat in chairs that existed only because human weapons had carved out their survival from the jaws of extinction. "The Devourer threat has been eliminated," Seokjin began, his voice carrying easily through the chamber without any of the diplomatic softness that once characterized council meetings. "Their central processing nodes have been destroyed, their manufacturing capabilities neutralized, their remaining forces scattered beyond any ability to reorganize." Polite applause rippled through the chamber, but it felt hollow. Everyone knew the price of victory. 43 star systems had been completely destroyed. Over 200 billion beings had died in the fighting. Entire civilizations had been reduced to refugee populations living on borrowed time. However, Seokjin continued, the galaxy that emerges from this war is not the same one that entered it. The old order of independent species, cooperating through voluntary agreements, has proven inadequate for the challenges we face. Ambassador Velkan, one of the few surviving members of the old council leadership, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Admiral, surely you're not suggesting that the emergency wartime measures should become permanent?" Seokjin's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "I'm not suggesting anything, Ambassador. I'm explaining the new reality. The galaxy now exists under human protection, which means it exists under human authority." The chamber erupted in angry voices, but they lacked the power they once carried. Every species present owed their continued existence to human intervention. Their fleets had been rebuilt with human technology, their economies were dependent on human manufacturing, and their security was guaranteed by human weapons. "This is conquest disguised as salvation," accused Representative Mordin from the Outer Rim worlds. "You're using our gratitude to justify tyranny. I'm using necessity to ensure survival," Seokjin replied calmly. "The next threat to this galaxy might not give us 3,000 years to prepare. It might not send advanced scouts or probe our defenses. It might simply arrive and begin destroying everything in its path." He activated a holographic display showing the current state of galactic defenses. Human ships patrolled every major system, human bases controlled every strategic location, and human commanders oversaw every military operation. "You have two choices," Seokjin said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "You can accept the new order and help build a galaxy strong enough to face whatever comes next, or you can resist and discover that humanity learned more than just how to fight devourers during our time in exile." The threat was clear but unspoken. The same ruthless efficiency that had defeated the devourers could easily be turned against any species that refused to cooperate. Slowly, one by one, the representatives gave their agreement. Not because they wanted to, but because they had no other choice. The galaxy had been saved, but the price was their independence. As the session ended, Seokjin looked around the chamber one final time. The real horror wasn't that humanity had become monsters to fight monsters. The real horror was that they had become so good at it.